Now, a little more about what happens when a loved one dies then. So this is obviously something I just experienced, so it's pretty fresh for me. And I can say that I was really struck by this experience in unexpected ways. First of all, love unites, right? So if you love somebody, you feel closer to them. You feel more empathy, more intimacy with them, right? So what's amazing is when a loved one dies, through your love and connection with them, you actually can share to some degree in their journey. You're in the body, they're no longer in the body, but because of your love and connection with them, you can share in that journey. And what this can feel like is that the barrier between this world and the next becomes much more permeable, much more fluid. It's like normally you might think of, this world as being very hard and fast and concrete, very real. And the thought of the afterlife and the different regions that you may have, heavenly regions or hell regions you may have read about or contemplated, seem like very abstract, distant, like a mirage or an idea that may or may not exist. But because when a loved one passes, it's like, and your connection with them, it's like that barrier between this world and the next becomes so permeable, and that afterlife becomes much more real. And suddenly this life, this world seems much less substantial somehow, more abstract, less consequential. It's not like of ultimate importance. The things that you worry about and concerns you have in your life, suddenly they don't seem that big a deal. The whole thing is much less consequential. And your perspective extends now into the afterlife as well. So, and this is simply by virtue of, having that connection with your loved one. Now, granted, also, you have to have some subtlety of perception. If you've never refined your senses, then you may not feel this. I don't know what everybody feels. Maybe everyone does feel it, maybe they don't, but I believe it's related. How clear this is must be related to how much you've refined your ability of perception. As it turns out, you can feel like, a loved one passing, it becomes actually a beautiful opportunity. Now, again, acknowledging the fact of grief, not belittling that, but it becomes this amazing opportunity. And there is this idea in some traditions I've read that in that journey after death, there are opportunities actually for liberation. That if you're somehow alert and prepared, and kind of the sort of map of the afterlife through that tradition, there's opportunities that would present you along the way to actually gain liberation. Now, that's one way of looking at it. But from your side, as the person still here in the world, what happens is these kind of ultimate questions of life and death, the sort of mysteries of life and death, are no longer abstract questions. You're vividly sensing the reality behind these questions. As I say, especially because your awareness is now extending into the afterlife by following your loved one in their journey and staying connected with them. And so it's actually a time of really deeply communing with the universe and life's mysteries. And that is absolutely an opportunity for profound evolution for you. Now, the other thing is, because you're connected with them, it's going to be a great opportunity for you to help them if you have a deep spiritual practice. So with the practices that we have in this course, you can shower your loved one's soul with soma. You can guide them to ever higher and higher heavenly regions. And so that they actually, you can help them out of that state of confusion, initial confusion, and sort of, flailing about in a completely new and unfamiliar realm and experience. You can assist them. And so, and it's kind of interesting because initially, it's probably right after death is probably one of the most confusing points. And especially nowadays, because it's a common practice in medicine to give people drugs to reduce pain, but even also anxiety. Like my mom didn't apparently have any physical pain that was clear. She was not indicating any physical pain, but they gave her drugs for her emotional state, for anxiety. Because as you're approaching this, depending on your degree of, preparedness and faith and everything, and she had actually a very strong faith, was very pious in her life, but still, it's natural to feel in this transition, this sort of ultimate transition, anxiety and fear. So they actually medicated her for that. And so, but when the body drops off, the value of those medications is done. It's not helping. And now you have to deal with the reality of it. And that first transition point is probably one of the more difficult points, where the attachments the soul feels to this world are breaking, where the mechanics of the senses shutting down. Now you're left with what? You have to, it's like going into a dark room. Your eyes have to adjust. Now the subtle senses come into play. And so it's one of the more difficult points. And so that's a very important time to be there for your loved one with your prayers and with your meditations, and showering them with soma, lifting them up through your intention towards higher and higher states. And it's interesting you're also very correlated, such that that's one of the most difficult times for them, but it's also likely a difficult time for you. That's in the fresh experience of your loved one passing. That's where the grief is probably going to be the most intense. So that's, again, you're kind of connected and you're correlated together. What happens, though, it seems to me, in my experience, is that after that initial phase, continually connecting and praying and showering with your intention for peace and happiness and soma and bliss, and raising them up in more glory towards higher states, towards liberation, that as that whole journey progresses for them, it also reflects back to you, so that as they come out of that confusion and fear and all of that, you come out of your grief and they're experiencing more happiness. That same happiness, that heavenly happiness, is reflecting in you. You're experiencing that happiness, and it's very healing for your grief. So, in fact, I believe, like in so many different traditions around the world, they say how important it is for so many days after death to be performing different ceremonies or prayer or meditations on behalf of the soul in their journey. And I can't think of anything that's more healing than that, because as you do that and as you follow them and feel them gaining ground in higher states, more blissful, peaceful states, then that's tremendously healing for you. If you have the feeling that they're having a difficult time and it's really hard on them, then it's also hard on you. So one of the best things you can do for both them and yourself is to do lots of spiritual practice with a focus and intention on your loved one. It's very important, I think. And the interesting thing is, like, this is how it was in my experience anyway. When they were alive, you could only do so much for them. I always encouraged my mom to meditate, but she didn't meditate that much. She did some. I taught her meditation. She would meditate once in a great while. I gave her lots of dietary advice. She'd hardly follow it ever, of course, to be expected. Anyway, but once, you can only do so much for them when they're, here on this earth. But in my experience, afterwards, they are facing the ultimate mystery of their existence, and their soul is so vulnerable. They are very eager and willing to receive those prayers and the benefit of your meditations and your intention. So you can just drench their soul in divine bliss and guide them towards liberation. And if they, can't make it to liberation, at least to a very high heavenly state where they are just, bathing in the light of the divine. Any questions about any of that?
No questions, but boy, is that ever profound. I wish I had known that a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know it's such an area where I wish I had been able to teach this long time ago. But unfortunately, as you may know, I pretty much teach from my experience. I don't get information from the internet and try to, repackage it. I don't read a bunch of books and repackage it. It's from my experience. So I was not really able to teach this until after my mom passed away, Sorry about that, because I know, like, Raj lost his parents recently, and I couldn't really give him the same information. So I think I only hinted at it to Raj then. In any case, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Is there Ajayan, is there a time binding to this? In other words, as more and more time passes, does the effectiveness of this connection and helping the spirit or the soul kind of reach higher levels diminish?
Well, okay, so honestly, I do feel that connection is the strongest, right in the early days. And I think Keisha, my wife, was telling me that in the Tibetan tradition, which she is basically a Tibetan Buddhist now, she said, I think they recommend for 49 days, you do this concentrated focus. I don't know what that time is in other traditions. I've just heard that one time factor. But in my experience, there is that kind of fading because they're going on their journey. They're doing their thing. And yeah. And the other interesting thing is, I'll tell you, it was pretty soon after my mom passed that I realized she was no longer an old lady. It's like you're behind the times if you're thinking of them as these old guys. Their soul isn't that age, So yeah, it's kind of interesting, these different little realizations that hit you as this happens. So, but anyway, the other thing was, I realized they're on their journey. It's like their soul has their own path to follow. They're not just your parent or just who they were in relation to you. They have their own thing going, and they're going to do it. But you can still assist them. So I am not saying, though, that it's too late. I'm saying I don't know. and so, yeah, I would encourage you to do what you can in your meditations and prayers for sure. Yes, Kimberly.
Yeah, I've communicated with spirits that have passed for many years through an intensive course that I've taken many years ago, and seriously, you know, meeting spirits in different places, and it really depends. It's just as there's more spirits out without bodies than there are with bodies, and so they're all on different, just like us, they're all on different places of kind of evolution, so to speak. So yeah, it's hard to answer just when it's just hard to say this happens on this day, you know, because it's the same with us.
Right. Yeah. So many different, it's like tracking the flight of birds, you know, in the sky. Trying to track the flight of souls after death. You know what I mean? It's like there's no tracking it exactly, but with the loved one, especially in the, you know, when it's fresh, there's such a strong connection and bond. You really can assist them very much so. And there's a reason that's a tradition throughout the world, because, you know, it's based on that raw data of people having experienced that so many times throughout the centuries. Countless people.
And if the soul themselves believes in a certain thing, it's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
that's the other thing. All these different systems and conceptions of the afterlife. I think it's probably very much linked to what the faith is of the person. Because, yeah, I don't think there's like one system that's right, that has it right, and everybody else is wrong. I don't buy that. So, yeah.
The field is very malleable.
Right.
Well, that was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing your experience, Ajayan.
Thank you for listening, folks. And yeah, it was really profound. And of course, I was lucky at the funeral, I gave a big talk about my mom. So that I took care of that part. That part's not for here, but you know, this was something different, which I couldn't say at the funeral. You know? So, all right.